Hey everyone, I'm Almar of almarsguides.com, and in this video here, I'm going to be talking about the Blood Assassin Specialization in Dungeon Siege 2. So this video is, I would say, part 4 of my series on Dungeon Siege 2, where I go over every specialization in the game, what skills to get, which spells to use, and give you as much information as I can possibly think of about the specialization and really everything you need to know about it. So this video is going to start out with, or rather I should say this is more of a podcasty sort of video. What's going on the screen is not going to be as relevant to the entire video. It's just mostly like gameplay footage of me playing the game right now, going through Kalnor Stronghold in the Broken World expansion. I will tell you to look at the screen from time to time when I'm showing you something important. Otherwise, for the most part, you can just Alt-Tab, listen to this while you're playing another game, playing this game, or, you know, exercising, doing whatever it is you may be doing. And, last but not least, if you would like to learn about other specializations in Dungeon Siege 2, be sure to check out my other videos in this series. I have one for every spec, and I'm going to be doing one that is more of a general purpose video, which is going to be covering useful abilities in every skill tree. And with all that out of the way, let's jump into the Blood Assassin specialization, talk about it a little bit, and explain everything there is to know about it. So, first and foremost, when you start out, you're going to have to decide what do you want to use, bow and crossbow or throwing weapons. So, this decision will need to be made with another decision, which is, do you want to use the Blood Assassin powers or do you want to use the ranged powers? So the Blood Assassin powers require you to put a lot of points into things that are kind of so-so in the Blood Assassin tree. So looking at Vix right now, if you want to tab to the screen and take a look at it, or just listen to me explain it to you. Essentially, Vix, my character who is not a Blood Assassin, he's just a very powerful ranged character. He has about 20 to 30 points in the Blood Assassin tree, but they're all over the top of the tree. So I don't get Mark Mastery, I don't get Rune Mastery, I don't get Improved Execute, and I don't get Improved Runes. Everything else, though, in the tree is very, very useful and worth getting as a Blood Assassin and just as a plain ranged character that wants to deal more damage. The top of the Blood Assassin tree is, I would say, required for ranged characters. If you want to deal as much damage as you possibly can as a ranged character, you need points in the Blood Assassin tree. With just like, there's no argument to that. That's valid. That goes the other way. That's valid. And the reason for that is the top of the Blood Assassin tree has a lot of flat damage boosts. Weapon enhancement, for example, it will boost the power of any weapon enhancement you're using, which we'll get into all of the different weapon enhancements momentarily. You also come with blood-soaked shots. This increases, it gives you a flat percentage boost to your range damage, as well as costing you a certain percentage of your max health with each shot. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, like, I don't really care if I do extra damage if it's going to get me killed. And I would be like, that's exactly how I feel in most games too, so I understand that. However, if you get at least 1 or 2 pieces of gear with some health steal on it, you'll completely negate the damage that is lost with each hit. You'll just automatically heal it. Because, let me actually show this to you. I'll set my party on wait. So let's run over here real fast. Now watch Amaran's health. See how each time I throw the item, the health is taken from me. However, when it makes contact with the enemy, the health is restored. And this goes along with what Blood-Soaked Shot says. You lose health per each ranged attack. However, the health is taken from you when the arrow or throwing weapon first is let loose from your character. When it makes contact with the enemy, if you have health steal, that health is restored. So technically, you're only losing health for like a half a second, if that, while the arrow is flying through the air towards the enemy. Once it makes collision with the enemy, if you have health steal, you'll get back any of the health that you spent on that ability. So that is definitely worth keeping in mind, and that kind of negates the downside of that ability. As for the other abilities in the Blood Assassin tree, Living Death, this is kind of a no-brainer. It or not so much a no-brainer, but it decreases your fire resistance and gives you physical resistance in exchange. And that's up to you if you want to do that. Physical damage is the most common form of damage in the entire game, although there is some areas / bosses / enemies that deal fire damage, and if you put too many points into living death, your character is just going to flop every single time you get into combat with one of those enemies, because he's just not going to be able to eat the damage that they throw at you. So keep that in mind. That's the one big downside to living death. So let's look at the other abilities in the Blood Assassin tree. Improved weapon enhancements. We'll do that last, hopefully, if I remember. So Shred Blood, this is the main one in the Blood Assassin tree, and this is also going to be one of the more important talents you want to get on all of your characters, even if they're not Blood Assassins, or rather, all of your ranged characters, even if they're not Blood Assassins. Essentially, Shred Blood gives you a chance to deal damage over time with a hemorrhage when you attack an enemy. You can also get Ignite Blood, which will ignite the blood. That basically it's another dot that lasts for 5 seconds and does a measly 70 damage over 5 seconds. I think it's 70 damage over 5 seconds, right? Yeah. Oh, 70 damage per second, not over 5 seconds. So it's significantly better. And it's worth mentioning there is also, if you're a throwing weapons user in range, come on, mouse over it. It's not showing me it because it's being a pain in the butt. For some reason, it keeps showing my tooltip in the upper left-hand corner of the screen when that is not what I want. So let me use Vix. No, and it's still not doing it right. That's weird. I don't know why it's doing that. It's the first time I've ever encountered that bug. So there we go. Bleed, along with... So, rather, let me start over. Bleed is one of the skills in the throwing weapon tree. And basically, it gives you a bleed that lasts for, I think, 4 seconds. I'm pretty sure it increases. No, it doesn't. Just 4 seconds. Only the damage increases the more talents you put into it. So Bleed is one of the throwing weapon skills, and that stacks with Shred Blood as well as Ignite Blood. So basically, if you are a Blood Assassin throwing weapon ranger, you not only deal damage with every hit that hits with the enemy, but you also have a chance of putting Bleed on them, Shred Blood, and Ignite Blood, which will give you 3 dots, and all 3 of these dots do stack. It is worth mentioning that everything in this game stacks. From my research, I have not found a single effect, debuff or buff, that did not stack. So keep that in mind. It's not like, your Ignite Blood is going to be canceled out by your Shred Blood, and your Shred Blood's going to be canceled out by your Hemorrhage, or whatever that one is called. Bleed. But keep that in mind, because that will give us a lot more overall damage and bonus ricochet. Essentially, thanks to our ricochet talent, you can ricochet to multiple enemies and inflict them with multiple dots. So this is really how you deal a lot of AoE damage as a throwing weapons ranged character. And this also brings me to something I brought up during the ranged video, which is, what is the main difference between bows and crossbows and throwing weapons? So, the main difference is bow and crossbow are more meant for single target DPS. And you can tell based on the talents. Like, bow and crossbow get access to mortal wounds, which increases the crit damage you deal by a couple 100%. Whereas throwing weapons get access to ricochet, which allows your attacks to ricochet to other nearby targets. So that kind of tells you right there that bow and crossbow are more geared towards AoE or single target damage, whereas throwing weapons are more geared towards AoE damage. And this kind of holds true as far as the powers go too. Blood Assassin is definitely geared more towards AoE damage than it is single target damage. However, if you would like to be a single target damage Blood Assassin, I'd recommend using some ranged powers instead. Really quick, I talk about this in much more detail in my ranged guide, but let's go through the ranged powers real quick here. So Take Aim. This is one of the best single target ranged attacks and ranged powers you can use. It's like Brutal Attack. It just does a shit ton of damage with one attack. Thunderous Shot. This is basically the same thing as Ravaging Strike, except it doesn't take 40% of your max health. And it basically stuns all enemies that it hits and deals about 2,000% normal damage to them, which is very good. However, it needs to be aimed, which is the biggest downside of that ability. Silence, I've never used this ability before because I've never found a real need to silence the enemies that I'm fighting. Charged shots. This is one of my favorite abilities for ranged characters. Essentially, it makes all of your shots deal lightning damage to the target you're hitting as well as all targets around them. And it is very, very, very good single target damage as well as AoE damage. It's good single target damage for bosses because it just adds like 2,000 lightning damage per attack, and it's very good AoE damage because it hits all other enemies in the nearby radius. Also, it will work with Shockwave, which is a bow and crossbow ability that allows you to do some AoE damage, but not too much. So, as far as what is better for Blood Assassins, I personally think throwing weapons is the way to go. And there's two reasons for this. One, throwing weapons work very well with Blood Assassin because Blood Assassin is built on AoE damage. Also, throwing weapons... let me port someplace real fast. Throwing weapons also have a chance to ricochet to nearby enemies. It also has a chance to penetrate through enemies if you get the penetrate ability. Now, why is this good? Well, if you're a Blood Assassin and you're using, say, Execute, then you have to put marks on the enemy. So right here, Mark of the Harvest, if you look at my screen. This, every single time you hit an enemy, it will apply Mark of the Harvest on them. And if you're using Execute, what Execute does is it allows you to explode all of your marks on all enemies that are currently suffering from a mark. And it deals like, it will increase the, let me look at Execute real fast. Right here. Basically, Execute, when you explode the Mark of the Harvest, it does about 1,000 damage, but Execute will increase the damage it does by a couple 100%. As you can see, Execute does it up to 340%. So that'll make it do like 3,000, 4,000 damage when I explode Execute, which is not bad. As for the other powers in the Blood Assassin tree, you have Ravaging Strike, which is like a crappier version of Thunderous Shot. Rune of Blood, which is the power that I'm using right now, which is probably the strongest AoE power for Blood Assassins. And then you have Rune of Sacrifice, which I don't think is worth using that much. Rune of Sacrifice essentially boosts the damage, power damage, of all enemies that are all allies that stand in the effect. However, it also reduces their health regen by 300%. So it basically takes away your health regen. But it gives you measly 30%, right? 50. So the party damage goes up. So if, I mean, it's up to you if you want to use it, really. I personally don't like it. I prefer my powers to deal damage, and I don't want a power that I have to like throw on the ground and then stand inside and stuff like that. So that's going to be like a situational one. Do you want it? Use it. If you don't want it, don't use it. It's going to vary from person to person. So once you decide which powers you want to use, you need to make the second decision, or rather, once you decide which sort of weapon you want to use, and then you decide which sort of powers you want to use, you need to make the next decision, which is, if you're using Execute, you're going to have to figure out which mark you want to use, and if you're not using Execute, then you're going to need to figure out which weapon enhancement to use. So, weapon enhancements basically are spells that they split the damage or split the experience between combat magic and ranged, and they will also the marks anyway will apply a debuff on the target. There are two very, very good weapon enhancements for this build aside from the marks. Let's look at Vix real fast because he has one of those. Shade's Agility, as you can see here. It basically just gives you a flat boost to dexterity. And which, as a ranged character, that will give you a flat boost to damage. So that is one of the two main weapon enhancements that I strongly recommend you use. I use Shade's Agility literally from like the lowest level possible all the way up to like level 80. I've never taken it off fixed. I've used it the entire way. And you can buff the damage, or benefit rather, of your weapon enhancement by putting points into improved weapon enhancements. There is one more defensive weapon enhancement that is worth mentioning, which is called Repulsion. This will increase the armor by 20% of your character that you have it on, and that's just the base value. You can increase how much it increases your armor if you put more points into the improved weapon enhancements. On top of increasing your armor, it also will knock back enemies that attack you. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. And that makes it amazing. Also, it's worth mentioning, the experience will not be split amongst ranged and combat magic unless you are using a bow. If you're using a bow, then the XP will be split, but if you're, say, you equipped Repulsion on your combat mage because you want the bonus armor and because you want the knockback enemies that hit you because you're a combat mage and you're super squishy, it will not split the XP between ranged and combat. In fact, it won't split the XP at all. It won't give you any XP penalty whatsoever. So, for that reason, I'd highly recommend you actually use Repulsion on your combat mages. And that brings us to another ability, Corpse Transmutation. So, Corpse Transmutation is a combat magic spell which will buff your armor, for lack of better words. And you might be wondering, well, okay, that's good and all, but what does armor necessarily do? Well, in Dungeon Siege 2, armor is the #1 thing that you want to increase your survivability. Armor will decrease all damage you take from physical sources. It doesn't actually say that when you mouse over it. However, I think... Oh, yes, it does. Yeah, higher armor reduces damage taken in combat. It just says reduces damage taken in combat. I think armor reduces damage taken from all sources, but I cannot confirm that because there's like no information on this game online. However, I know for a fact it does decrease damage from physical sources at the very, very least. Also, something worth mentioning is enemies will always go after the person in your group with the lowest armor. That is something that I figured out because I was wondering why my healer constantly was dying over and over and over and over. And so I eventually realized that they had the lowest armor. So I buffed their armor, and then I noticed the enemies kept going after my Blood Assassin because he had the second lowest armor. Now the lowest armor after I buffed my Nature Mage's armor. And that's kind of what clued me in. And then I experimented a few more times and realized, yes, the enemies do focus the character with the lowest armor first. So if you have a healer, just make sure they don't have the lowest armor, and then your healer won't die as often as they often as they usually do. And that brings me to the marks, which oops, wrong character. Mark of the Harvest, as I said earlier in the video, is in my opinion the best mark. There's other marks that they deal less damage than Mark of the Harvest, or they may deal more damage, but they don't have that lifesteal effect that it comes with the death damage. And also I find that there's a lot less enemies in the game that are immune to death damage versus like fire and lightning damage. There's quite a few that are immune to that. Also, considering the fact that I have a combat mage in my party that usually does lightning damage, and I have my ranged character who does charged shots, also lightning damage, I didn't want a mark that also does lightning damage because then I have too much of one damage type. And that's not the best for when I run into an enemy that's highly resistant to lightning. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, as for... That's really all you need to know about the spells for a Blood Assassin. Don't use any active spells. You don't want to use any combat magic abilities like active abilities. So don't ever like switch to Firebolt or something like that. Don't ever switch to like Lightning Blast or anything like that. Just focus entirely on your ranged weapon. That's all you want to use. Your auto-cast spells, like I said, Corpse Transmutation, not bad. Mark, not bad. You have to ask yourself if you want to use a pet. I would actually recommend against it because there are a lot of... there's a lot of skills you need to spend your skill points on in order to get the most out of a Blood Assassin. There are like 4 or 5 skills in the range tree that you need, and then there's also like 4 or 5 skills in the Blood Assassin tree that you need, and at that point you're basically out of skill points. So that is the main reason you wouldn't want to use a pet, or rather you wouldn't want to invest points into the pet talents. You can use a pet if you want. You should have enough auto cast slots available. However, I don't recommend wasting too many points into the pet talents because of the aforementioned reasons. Now, once we arrive through this teleporter, we'll go through a few of the other skills. And take a sip from my drink real fast to wet my whistle. So, looking at the, well, actually, let's look at Vic's real fast, his active spells, since he actually has a few. So, something I like to do is I like to try to put Resurrect on as many characters as possible, as well as Summon Teleporter and Transmute. So far, my tank is the only character right now with Transmute, but as you can see, I have a few Summon Teleporters and a few Resurrects. I really, right now, actually, every single character in my group has a Resurrect, which is good. Because I never know who's going to die and how many people are going to die. So it's useful to have as many Resurrects as possible. Now, this brings us to, since we're done with the spell book, that's really all you need to know about spells. There's only like a few autocast spells that are actually worth using, and really no active spells except for, you know, the nature ones that I just mentioned. And that brings us to the other skills and the other powers. I can't remember if I mentioned this, but if you don't want to use the Blood Assassin powers, I recommend charged shots if you are using a bow or crossbow. If you're using a throwing weapon, I recommend Shrapnel Blast. Flurry is good too if you're using a throwing weapon for single target damage. However, biggest downside with Flurry is you have to put points into Cunning Renewal, which is crap. I hate Cunning Renewal. It just decreases the cooldown on your powers, which is like, I don't use my powers every single time that they're off cooldown, even though the fact that I probably should. There's just too many powers when you get to elite difficulty, and they're just always popping up. Other ones are like recharging here or there. It's too much to keep track of, so I don't always use them, and I feel as if the points in Cunning Renewal and talents like it are wasted if you don't always keep your powers on cooldown. So that brings us to all the other skills that you would possibly want for your Blood Assassin. Let's start with melee. So for melee, in the melee skill tree, really, you always want Fortitude, Toughness, and Reinforced Armor. Those are like the bread and butter melee abilities. Toughness increases, or Fortitude increases your max health. Toughness increases your physical damage resistance, which is very, very important. And Reinforced Armor increases your armor, which reduces all the damage that you take. Aside from those, really, there's no point in getting anything else in the melee tree for Blood Assassins. As far as the range tree goes, you want to avoid everything in the top of the tree unless you plan on using a bow and crossbow. Then you'll get that and avoid everything in the bottom of the tree. And the only exception to this rule is dodge and survival. These are both at the bottom of the tree, and dodge increases your chance to dodge attacks, obviously, and survival increases your resists to fire, ice, and lightning, which is very, very good too. In the combat magic tree, if you want to use a curse like drown or something like that, then you might want to get debilitation. Aside from that, really nothing. You don't want to bother focusing on brilliance because we're not going to be casting spells all that much. There's no point in getting summon alacrity because we can spend our skill points into other things that are more beneficial to us, and there's no point in getting really anything else in the combat tree, despite the fact that Blood Assassins are half combat, half ranged. And I actually wonder, this is something I have not confirmed or tested myself, if like abilities like Grim Necromancy buff the damage of the powers that deal death damage. Like if Grim Necromancy will buff the power of Rune of the Dead. That's something I might actually respec and try, and I'll add that into my text guides because I'm genuinely curious. Nature magic, nothing. Really nothing to get in there. You don't want to waste talents into the pet talents at the top of the tree. And if you're going to use either Feral or Wrath of the Bear, yes, or Spirit Embrace, then you want to get Enveloping Embrace or you want to get Feral Wrath. Otherwise, I don't really recommend you get either of those. And honestly, for a Blood Assassin, I don't recommend that you get either of them to begin with anyway because we're short for points. Feral Wrath and Enveloping Embrace, I recommend them for melee characters, specifically dual wield / two-hand characters. Those are the characters that will have the most leftover skill points. Also, Fist of Stone or Nature Mages. Any character that is going to come with innate plus points in Nature Magic is good for those buffs. Like, let's look at Tar real fast, my Nature Mage. I have 0 points spent into either of these skills, but they're already at 12 because I have so much plus skills in nature magic already. So that is something to take into consideration. So let's go back to my list of skills. Blood Assassin, we've gone over a few of these so far, but let me mention stuff like weapon enhancements here. So looking at weapon enhancements, as you can see, I only have 7 points into this. Now, you have to, once you start getting higher level and you start getting a lot of points spent into these abilities, like look at this one right here. Blood-soaked shots. Putting 1 more point into this increases my max health loss by 1% and my damage done by 1%. Sorry, hiccups. Now, I find myself asking myself, is 1% damage and 1% health loss worth the skill point? My answer is no. No. Like that Bugs Bunny gif where he's Bugs Bunny meme where he's like, no. That is how I feel about that. As far as improved weapon enhancement, now you have to ask yourself if you're going to get more benefit from putting points into improved weapon enhancement than you would putting points into blood-soaked shots, which gives you 1% damage boost. At this current point in time, I would say yes, because you start to get diminishing returns the higher you go. So, technically, this right here, improved weapon enhancement, should give me more benefit than blood-soaked shots for the 1 skill point. And you're going to need to have to make that decision as you level up more and more. And as you start spreading around your skill points as you get to as high of a level as I currently am. Which is I'm like 3 levels away from max level in this game, so. And that's really, oh, Fist of Stone. That's the last thing I can think to explain. Now, you might be looking at Fist of Stone and wondering to yourself, like, okay, well, what can I get in Fist of Stone? Chant of Stone. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. Yep, Chant of Stone. This right here is, I don't want to call it the best skill in the game, but it's pretty damn close. This will increase your armor and health, depending on what your intelligence is, and it's phenomenal. There's no skill in the game that gives you more survivability, in my honest opinion, than this one. And I strongly recommend it if you have, like, see my character right now, the Amarin that I'm clicked on. He doesn't have that high of intelligence, but he has enough intelligence that he would get some benefit out of Chant of Stone. Let me actually show you. So look at Amarin right now. 570 armor and 2,774 health. Let me write that down real fast because I will forget if I just click away. And my armor just went down if you look because corpse transmutation expired. So armor 398 and health is 2,774. So let's spend 1 point real fast into Chant of Stone. So my armor is now 405, so it went up basically exactly as much as it said. So it said my armor was going to go up by what? 7.5? So my armor went up from 398 to 405. So yeah, exactly 7 points. So my intelligence, and what about my health? 2,774 is what I had, and now I have 2,792. And it says I was going to get 18 health, so it's about how much health it gave me. Now, as you can see, my intelligence did not increase that by too much. I want to see something here too. Do I have anything that gives me intelligence? I don't think I do. Well, by golly. Now, if I had more health, it would probably show me on what I wanted to check is if the tooltip would there's 1 intelligence, but it'll reduce my armor so I won't be able to get a good look. I wanted to see if the tooltip would increase how much health and armor it said it gave me if I increased my intelligence, or if that would just be like a hidden thing. Chant of Stone though is best for casters. Like, let's look at my Tar right now. As you can see, Tar, she's my nature mage. She has 648 armor, which is insane. And she has that much armor because of Chant of Stone. Well, that's one of the reasons, but that, and also she has some points into reinforced armor and melee too, which buffs my armor by a decent amount. But that's the usefulness of Chant of Stone. Chain of Stone is very, very useful for most characters, but if you don't have high intelligence, then I'd recommend skipping it, at least, or at least spec out of it later on in the game when you don't need survivability as much. And that is pretty much all I can think of teaching you guys about Blood Assassins in Dungeon Siege 2. If you think I left anything out, please leave a comment below. Also, if you would like to learn more about this build, the Specialization, and other builds in Dungeon Siege 2, please check out my website, almarsguides.com. I have text versions of each of these guides. Also, I have additional videos aside from this one, which covers each of the other specializations. If you would like to learn more about melee or ranged or nature magic or anything like that, check out one of my other videos. And that's really all there is to it. Don't forget to like the video if you did enjoy it. And if you would like to see more video game videos similar to this one, please subscribe to my channel because I typically do videos for games that I find a lot of fun. And Dungeon Siege 2 was definitely one of those games. I'm more of a retro gamer too, so if you are a fellow retro gamer, you prefer playing older games like this, then you'll definitely probably find other guides on my channel that would be relevant to you. Anyway, that's all there is to it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and I will catch you guys around in my other Dungeon Siege 2 videos. Peace.